All right, I wanted to come back to verse 32 because some interesting things going on here. First of all, you notice I've highlighted the word assembly, and that's the word ecclesia, where we get our word church. And I've mentioned this before, but I want to say it again. This is a word that existed, hundreds of years before the church started, and it literally means called out ones, but the original use of that was in the Athenian democratic idea, where people would be called out of various sectors of the community to represent their community at large and carry on business. So the church simply adopted that. It's an assembly. In other words, the best way, if this were happening in America, we could say that this new thing we're calling an assembly, and that word assembly becomes known, for its religious purpose, and it's kind of happened with what happened with the word ecclesia. So it's a word that actually has four different meanings in the book of Acts. Back in chapter 7, remember it referred to the congregation, the ecclesia of Israelites wandering in the wilderness. It was just a group of people in the wilderness. And here in Acts 19, it's used of this mob that is gathered in the theater. It's going to be used of a legal place of proceedings as well. And so, you find that the word is used in a variety of contexts, but it always has to do with a gathering of some sort. Okay. So just keep that in mind. And notice that he says that most of them didn't even know why they were there. That's a very interesting statement. Um, Something really big and interesting was happening in the theater. Let's go in and check it out. And, it was an uprising, it was a party, it was confusion, it was people yelling and screaming and running around. And a lot of people just thought that was really cool. And so they wanted to be a part of it. Yeah, just really, really crazy. Um, so what happens? They draw Alexander out of the multitude. Now, who's Alexander? He is probably a lawyer. And again, the Jews are concerned that what's happening here with Paul and these followers of Jesus, many of them being Jews coming out of the synagogue, could easily be associated with the Jews in general in Ephesus. Same sort of thing happened back in Corinth. So they get this guy that's an orator, and they want him to explain that what's happening here has nothing to do with the synagogue or the Jewish people. So he motions with his hand. He wants to make his defense. But notice what happens. They find out that he's a Jew. And again, think of the anti Semitism that we've already talked about so many times that's going on in the Greek and Roman world. And so, all with one voice cried out for about 2 hours, "Great is Diana of the Ephesians." Now, I'm going to speculate here, but I think you'll understand the reasoning behind this. How in the world is a mob like this in a theater that fits 25,000 people? We don't know how many people are in here, but the place is really buzzing. How in the world are they going to manage to cry out for 2 solid hours, "Great is that Diana of the Ephesians, great is Diana of the Ephesians"? I have to believe that in a city that is so full of magical arts and drugs and sorcery and other things, that there's a lot of alcohol in this place, a lot of drug abuse, and probably a lot of sexual promiscuity going on at the same time. And so, these people they're under the influence of one thing or another, and they're running on pure adrenaline. I mean, adrenaline that is energized with drugs, alcohol, sex, whatever it is that's going on here. I mean, it is one ugly moral mess for 2 hours. And finally, after 2 hours, the clerk of the city is able to quiet the crowd down, and he says to them, "Men of Ephesus, what man is there who does not know that the city of the Ephesians is temple guardian of the great goddess Diana and of the image which fell down from Zeus?" Now, again, I'm speculating here, but by the time this guy actually has a chance to get up and articulate, these people are probably so zoned, they are so wiped out after 2 hours of this carrying on, that I wonder how many of them actually even hear what he says. Okay. Some of them are probably already crashed, and they've fainted or they've gone to sleep or whatever. I mean, it is an absolute shame what is happening in this city. But he goes on, therefore, since these things cannot be denied, you ought to be quiet and do nothing rashly. For you've brought these men here who are neither robbers of temples or blasphemers of your goddess. Never did they speak out publicly against Diana. They weren't going around robbing temples, which was something that would happen frequently because there were a lot of valuables, a lot of times gold and silver in these temples. They did none of this. Therefore, if Demetrius, and notice Demetrius is identified, they recognize he's the one that started all this. If Demetrius and his fellow craftsmen have a case against anyone, the courts are open and there are proconsuls. We've talked about proconsuls before, right? Sergius Paulus in Cyprus, Gallio in Corinth. Let them bring charges against one another. But if you have any other inquiry to make, it shall be determined in the lawful ecclesia, another word for the word assembly. Okay, so again, ecclesia can be a church, it can be a lawful assembly, it can be a mob, or in the case of chapter 7, it refers to Israel in the wilderness. And again, it can mean a lot of other things as well. Okay, now this guy airs his real concern at this point. He says, we're in danger of being called in question for today's uproar, there being no reason which we may give to account for this disorderly gathering. This is a capital city, so it's a prime city in the Roman Empire. It's expected to be orderly. And this guy, whatever his position is one of responsibility. He may well be the one that's going to have to give an account for what's going on here. And he is concerned about the ramifications of this. And when he had said these things, he dismissed the mob, the assembly, the ecclesia. And here I've given you all of the occurrences of the word ecclesia in the book of Acts. You can see there are many. And so, the story ends on a very, very sad note. It's not a good situation right now in Ephesus. But one thing is clear. The word of the Lord has made an impact. And even though Paul is now going to leave after 3 years in this city, God has done an incredible work, and the church is going to continue to flourish here. And later on in prison, when Paul writes a letter to the Ephesians, he's going to write a letter that is very, very encouraging. He's not going to have to deal with any major issues. It probably is going to become a circular letter that is sent all over the place, and of course, eventually becomes part of the New Testament canon. So with all that's going on here, Ephesus does become a place where the name of Jesus Christ is loudly and clearly proclaimed, and many, many come to faith. So, wow, we are coming to the end of Paul's third journey now, and he is ready to take off and do some traveling. And in the next videos, we'll see where he goes and what happens in those locations as he makes his way back to Jerusalem.